Michael with United Veterans Worldwide, excited for an interview today that I've been waiting for several weeks with Dr. Brian, and he is the author of a book that I've started to read, How to Get Your Resisting Loved One into Treatment. And I'm sure we'll talk through some of the chapters in this book briefly and then encourage people to obtain their own copy through Amazon, and I'm sure Brian will share with me how to direct people to the right location to get that. But I'd like to introduce you to Brian. So Brian, will you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks. Good morning, and thank you for having me on here, Michael. Appreciate what you're doing. Well, I am a licensed psychologist. I have my PhD. I practice out of California, and currently I'm telehealth. I see a range of clients on different levels across California. I'm also in private practice. I see clients there. Most of the clients I see are these families who are struggling with a resistant loved one, and I help support them and try to strategize ways to get their loved one to a point where they can accept help and still come from a caring place, but also be firm on our boundaries and limits. I also have a specialization in insomnia. I work a lot with substance use disorder and, of course, the family crisis strategies. And then as well, one of the biggest things I'm very passionate about is community service and community education. So for almost 15 years, for the National Alliance of Mental Illness, I've been facilitating a support group for them with families who are in some level of crisis, who need education and support, as well as PALS, which stands for Parents of Addicted Loved Ones. It's an organization also that provides support for families who are struggling with a loved one. And so for both of those entities, NAMI in short, and PALS, I participate in knowledge forums or write blogs or articles for them as well. And so, of course, media appearances like this podcast are a big way to spread the message of mental health awareness. So again, I really appreciate yourself and all the other podcasters out there who are doing this, I think, a very important service to the people out there who need the help or family members who could use the support.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I'm excited to interview you today and learn your story because you really are on the front lines of the battle with mental health, and a lot of what I share on this channel with the audience that tunes in, and to the veterans I interview and meet with face to face, we often talk very openly now about our mental health challenges. What was once in the military for us an unspoken awareness, and to give you a little reference, when I first became an officer in the Army in infantry, I was told to never get sick, to never get cold, to never get hot, to never be hungry, to never be tired, and to never show that weakness to my men. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was stupid when I heard it first, because I'm like, of course we're going to be hungry, tired, cold, whatever, sick even. But the message was really drilled into all of us that we were not allowed to have that show. And so we locked everything in. We suppressed trauma. We took our pain and we just dealt with it in probably unhealthy ways. As a way of coping, especially when we're in a combat zone where there isn't really time to deal with the trauma. And I interviewed a guy yesterday, a new buddy of mine, Aaron, and he shared some experience that were very, very difficult from a combat scenario. And he referenced that same ideology, which was we didn't have time to process the death of a friend or whatever. Mm-hmm. We were so concerned about our security and our survival that we just kept pushing forward. In your work with families and in the community that you're in now, and obviously you're doing telehealth, which means you can reach a larger audience across more than just your local region. But tell me about the battle lines that are currently being drawn in the families that you work with.
Well, actually, very similar to what you had just mentioned, and just a little bit of a backdrop too is throughout my training, I have worked with returning veterans that were deployed in Afghanistan and Iraq, and worked with a lot on various capacities and to better understand the culture and what they went through. And that is a very, very common thread that they discuss, whether or not they're deployed. A lot of people think, for example, that mental distress that people deal with, you have to be on the grounds deployed. And I worked with several people who were never, per se, in battle, so to speak. They were at base and still dealt with post-traumatic stress disorder from hearing stories from people, or not even in the vicinity. They could be somewhere else and distance from the battlegrounds and still experience a high level of acute stress or post-traumatic stress disorder. And so it's really important. It's very similar when you speak, and when I think about those people, males and females, who I've worked with in the past, very similar to the fight that we take on. Right? It's and if you came across my book, I conceptualized the disease as this external entity, so to speak. And the more we can understand and externalize something, the more concrete we can make it. We can understand its capabilities, its patterns, its behaviors. And I think we do that with anything, whether it be an adversary, an opponent, and in this case, the mental health diseases of addiction, depression, anxiety. When we can fully understand its patterns, behaviors, and how it manifests or shows up for that particular person, or whether it be in a family individual, we're able to comprise a strategy or plan to manage it or actually defeat it in many regards. And so the battlegrounds is very similar, very much so, whether it be in the military or not. I still believe on a very general level, we still have a culture, whether it be here in the United States or across the world, because I work with a lot of people from different countries and ethnicities and backgrounds and cultures from across the world. And that is still the recurring theme, is there's certain perspectives on mental health. Some cultures believe expressing emotions is a form of weakness. Mental health is a character defect. And it really, really creates this stigma and barrier for people to get help. And one of the biggest barriers is shame. Shame is a sense of humiliation. And if I could comment, Michael, real quickly, is with the military, part of that mindset, and that's very needed for that ability to be successful. And as such, and whether it be what role you play in, whether you're a police officer, whether it be emergency medical room physician, whether it be a therapist like myself, there are certain roles we need to be successful, and even for survival in some regards. What happens is, when it gets so entrenched in our mind, it becomes part of our system, our brain chemistry changes, we don't learn to turn it off. And that's the biggest thing that happens when I work with people who are in such professions, is they became so adapted to that way of life and being in survival. But when they come back to civilian life, they're not able to turn it off. And so they're still in that same realm. And that's why some type of debriefing or some type of help, support can really, really help people acclimate or assimilate back to that other lifestyle they're engaging in. That they no longer have to be hypervigilant. They no longer have to be concerned about certain things that they were in that environment they were in for a period of time.
Yeah, and I tried to play mind games when I first came home and say, like, oh, of course that piece of trash on the side of the road isn't a hidden IED. You know, I'm in Nowhereville, Kansas, and I don't know the last time there was an IED in Kansas. Probably never. But for some reason, yeah, the mind just wouldn't let go of the, I don't know if it's fear or readiness. I don't know what it is, but it took a while to break that mindset to look for those dangers on the side of the road, where now I'm able to drive freely and not have that inner battle for security, so to speak.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that is a very common one that people express. Is actually, there was during the Iraq War, I was watching a documentary of a trauma surgeon who was, of course, helping provide medical care and emergency trauma response to people in the military who were being injured. And he said, when you're in a particular environment for a period of time, especially a high level, he said your actual brain chemistry changes. Certain pathways of thinking change. And I also specialize in sleep. And there are certain parts of the brain that promote sleep. But when you are in a high degree of distress or in a survival part, those areas that promote sleep get impacted. And so that's why there's this hypervigilance that occurs, as well as other things, suspiciousness, and so forth. And so one of the biggest things that you talk about with a piece of trash not being an IED, the same way that generalizes to people I've worked with, an abandoned cart doesn't mean the same thing on the side of a freeway that it does in Kansas or wherever else, as opposed to somewhere like Afghanistan and Iraq. Driving over a freeway isn't the same thing as it means driving on a 101 freeway in Los Angeles than it is driving under a bridge in the Middle East where there's a hot zone. And so those things are very real. And that's why intensive therapy, where we change the brain chemistry to tell the person that they're no longer in that situation. And one of the biggest treatments that we do is we revise the thoughts and emotions and beliefs regarding a certain situation. For example, you say a piece of trash, one thing you'll take yourself through is go through that anxiety, sit with it, reality test, it's a piece of trash, I'm not in that zone anymore, there's no inherent danger, to the point where you may even check out that piece of trash and to make sure. And that's what we do in a lot of treatment, is find evidence to confirm these beliefs that you've created, right? And also, again, a big one is a bunch of school children running at you, or in a group that in America means something very different in the Middle East. And so those are very, very real. And the great thing is people can heal from these and they can change, but it does take work. It takes acceptance. It takes the ability to get through that shame and being willing to talk about it. So I'm really, really happy, as you being an officer, being able to talk about that. Mental health is very real, and we have a lot of people out there who are struggling, and they come back home and they're forgotten, get over it, and you get a lot of people in the military who are struggling with substance use disorder, as you know, suicidality, marital issues, family issues, anger, and it's a real issue. The great thing is we can do something to help.
Yeah. Brian, I appreciate your words, and it's obvious that you've had enough exposure to these issues that veterans and first responders, who are a majority of those who tune into my content, really are. And I want to go backwards in time a little bit, Brian, and talk about you for a second. So why did you get into this line of work? What experiences in your life led you to want to help other people in the way that you do now and carry their burdens, so to speak?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. That's actually a very popular question, and that I've had throughout my career. And in my book, I actually write about that in chapter 1, is that my pathway to this wasn't unidirectional. It was all over the place. And I talk about how my 20s were very, very uncertain of my path in life and finding out what was a good fit for me. And so there was a period of my time where medical school was the route I was going to take, so taking classes and pursuing that. Law enforcement was something that I was fascinated with. And I actually entered another PhD program in psychology, but it had nothing to do with therapy. It was a field called industrial organizational psychology. And so these are your statisticians, these are your human resource directors that study behavior in the workplace. They'll study things like downsizing, effective, productive culture, choosing the right employees. And we actually did some military mission readiness metrics and so forth. And so it was a great field for those people who that's what they're in, right? And however, I knew it wasn't a good fit for me. And before going into the clinical route, I was doing some work. I worked with severely emotionally and physically abused adolescents. And so I got a preview. I was able to connect with them. And then as I look at it in hindsight, people would tell me that, hey, you should be a clinician. You're you have skills of listening and empathizing and understanding people. And so it kind of came to head when I realized that 2 years in, and I got my master's in that other PhD program, that I need to make a change because this is not the field for me. And it was a nice transition. The school that I was at had a clinical program, literally neighboring departments, and so it was a seamless transition. Got support from my professor in the other program, and haven't looked back since. And so that's kind of where I came. It was there all along. It just took a circuitous pattern, and then some affirmations from people, and then into this field of working in addiction. Just worked with a psychiatrist who so happened to be opening up a facility when I first came on board with him, and so I transitioned to there, and it fell into place the way I believe it's supposed to fall into place. I just had to go through this journey for whatever reason of discovering it. But I truly feel like, and I talk about it in my talks, I feel like I have a reset in life. I'm middle-aged, and I feel like I have a reset, a new chapter in life, and I just feel a lot of energy and passion to continue to do what I do.
So I like the fact that you've talked about this renewed energy and passion, because a lot of what I want to encourage the audience today who are still struggling is to find their purpose. And if they can find a purpose that doesn't feel like work, but feels like there's a lot of endorphins that shoot, there's a lot of the gifts or talents you might have, you're able to use those better. That purpose can be a great healing source going forward. And I'm glad that's something that you found. This channel has been that for me for the last almost 13 weeks. Hearing veteran stories, it reminds me that I'm not alone. It reminds me that there's still hope in the journey. I wanted to talk about a couple of statements that I got from your book that I felt were standout themes throughout what I was able to read and skim through. One of the quotes says, "People in dire situations can navigate healthier path when every person in the intimate support system does their part." So what is this part that these people in their intimate or their circle of trust can do to help a person who's struggling with PTSD, depression, anxiety, or even unrelated to military, just trauma in general, which is kind of the language of the world?
Yeah, and that is one of my must-know knowledges that I talk about, and that are foundational to what I believe, no matter where you're at, how educated you are in this realm, that are essential for navigating this process. And so what I mean by that is, and as you can relate to in your experiences, whether it be in a team, sports, or even the military, is the importance of everyone in that team taking an equal share of accountability. And because I like to use this analogy, and I use a lot of metaphors, but on a rowboat, right? If you ever rowed a boat, the best way to maximize speed and distance is if everyone is assuming equal share of responsibility and working 100% on their equal share of responsibility. Does that mean every single person on that rowboat is equally talented, equally strong, athletic, have equal levels of stamina? Absolutely not. Yeah. But as long as everyone is sharing an equal share of responsibility and working 100%. So, for example, if you have a boat of 5 people, right? Everyone on that boat has to assume 20% responsibility on their job and work 100%. And I use that in any team, right? A basketball team, soccer team, anything, that everyone has their part. And so the reason I relate to that is the intimate family union. Okay, and I call it the coalition, and especially in the very early stages of someone struggling and trying to get them help. Is the coalition are the people who've been identified and vetted. And they don't necessarily have to be family members per se. This could be a good friend. This could be a cousin. This could be a spouse. And these are the people who are going to be most intimately involved and are decision makers, and the people who aren't going to stray away from the vision. And so I tell them that, let's say there's a family of 4, maybe a husband, a wife, a mom and dad. And I said, no matter who did what, that struggling loved one, whoever it is, moving forward, if you want to make change, you all moving forward have to assume 25% responsibility, work 100% on that share. What I mean by that 25%, because everyone contributes to some degree. There's a saying in the recovery arena, the 3 C's: you didn't cause it, you can't cure it, you can't control it, but on some way you've perpetuated, or what we call enabled it on some form or fashion. You could have, of course, the struggling loved one who may be struggling with trauma and substance abuse and refusing to get help. That's their 25% that they need to obviously work on. Maybe you have a father who grew up in a culture or a household where weaknesses were viewed as emotions and it causes problems. That's his 25% he has to work on. And maybe the mother over nurtures and over supports their loved one and bails them out in uncomfortable situations, and that causes problems. That's her 25%. And maybe the spouse maybe has his or her own substance abuse issues, and that causes problems. And so that's the 25% he or she has to work 100% on. And so it's an all hands deck approach. And that's where you see the most maximization in anything. It's not, there's this correlation a lot that the person that's done the most harm or who's done the most destruction is the one that has to do most of the work. And that model, as you can imagine, is very disabling and can become dysfunctional and counterproductive. If I may make a basketball comment, you I think it's a basketball shirt, correct?
Yeah. I coached basketball at high school level for a couple of years. Yeah.
Okay, so if I may, because this is the one that always comes up to my mind, is Michael Jordan, right? We know who Michael Jordan is, one of the greatest basketball players ever for the Chicago Bulls. And so one of the things that I remember growing up, and then I read with Phil Jackson, was, remember those days where he was scoring 60, 70 points a game, right? He could demolish anybody. He could take on 3 people, sometimes 4, but definitely one-on-one. But they weren't winning championships. They could win games here and there, but they weren't winning championships. And I remember reading something about Phil Jackson said, "Hey man, you can't do this on your own. You can't do this on your own, and you have to share the vision, the task with your teammates." And ever since he did that, they were unstoppable. And he was able to. Does that mean every single person on the team were high level talent like he? Absolutely not. But he recognized that everyone had an equal share of responsibility, and so that's what's important. You see with a lot of family members, dad or mom's doing all the work, right? And then what happens? They end up getting burned out, and the whole system founders. And so it's an all hands approach and equal share of responsibility. So that's what I mean by that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that explanation and the analogy. I could envision from the movie that was recently released, Boys in the Boat, right? Everybody having to learn how to pull, and it took a long time for everybody to learn how to do their part properly. And I can imagine in a family setting where we're talking about enablers or people who put more roadblocks in front of the person who's struggling or whatever, everybody's got to take some time and recover. And I want to put a personal invitation for people to really consider therapy as a form of their recovery. It's not often that we can heal ourselves, because again, if what Dr. Brian has already stated, our minds can shift, can form different pathways around the difficult areas, and we may not be thinking clearly enough to do the healing on our own. And so a therapist can be that external third party who can look in and say, here's where we can make some improvements, and here's where we can make some adjustments. And I can say for myself that my journey with therapy has been life-saving. Whether I was doing exposure therapy or EMDR or other different practices that helped me to pull from this buried in my soul location and pull these experiences out, because as I've stated before, the body keeps score. Muscles have memory, and repressed trauma will come out in negative ways, whether it's mood, behavior, emotions. The body can't sustain holding on to those things in healthy ways. There's another quote here that caught my attention. And somebody recently that I interviewed said something very similar. I think it was Amy, my Canadian female veteran. She mentioned this because I said how important it is for spouses sometimes to confront a veteran or first responder who's stuck in isolation or other things, and to kind of just say, hey, this is not how we do things in this home. Like, get up out of this room. I don't care what you do, but go take a walk, go do something, but you can't just sit here all day. And your quote says this: I can't emphasize enough how paramount it is to prioritize your own recovery and healing. In other words, take care of yourselves. If you are not healthy yourself, helping a loved one is extremely difficult. And Amy mentioned this to me, and she says, well, I agree to that, but I can't monitor someone else's behavior all the time. I've got to take care of me. I've got to drop other stuff, and I've got to make sure that I am caring for myself. And then once I've done that sufficiently, I then have ample room to help take care of other people.
Yep. So Amy, great, and that definitely resonates. And so what happens is, I believe that we sometimes overemphasize how much power we have over something, right? And so a lot of times people think I can overlove the person to stop drinking. I can overlove them to want to get better. And you can't do that. That's not the way the disease, how I conceptualize it, works. And exactly that. And so, when we're not taking care of ourselves, the lens that we look through can be very, very unclear and cloudy, right? And so we are not able to see, because when we're healthy ourselves, there's certain attributes when we're our better self and when we have a strong recovery. And recovery is just any plan in place for healthier outcomes. So I believe we all have some version of a disease. A disease isn't just a mental health or a substance abuse issue or medical condition. To me, I define disease as any entity in our life that's been chronic, meaning long-lasting, and causes impairment in our life. And so, yes, a medical disease can be hypertension, it could be Crohn's disease, it could be diabetes, right? Of course, mental health, it could be a substance use disorder, it could be depression, PTSD, and whatever, and anxiety. And so I believe, though, a disease can be any entity that causes impairment in things like selfishness, hedonism, which is the seeking of pleasure, materialism, racism. If those entities cause impairment in your life and it's something you try to manage, that is your version of a disease. And so therefore, we're also from recovery. Recovery is our intentional plan in place for better outcomes in living. And so I believe if we all maximize and develop our best recovery program, everything falls into place. We're more effective in anything that we do. We're effective physically, mentally, emotionally, relationships, as a family person. It's very hard to be an effective coach, right, in basketball if you're not your healthiest self. It's very hard to be a parent, a teacher, a leader, a partner, a friend, if we're not our best recovery self. And so that's where that quote came from, is because we overemphasize too as well, like I said, how much power we really have in a situation, recognizing what we can and cannot control. And so what you do with that person, what Amy's doing, can't do with that person, I'm not sure how that played out for her, is coming from a loving place, but set some boundaries and limits. For example, like, hey, this is not okay. I'm here to support you, but this is not going to be okay. It's the rowboat part, in this house. We've got to participate. We've got to do our part. And so there's different strategies of doing that and coming from a loving place to setting some firm limits and boundaries. But yeah, I'm glad that she recognized that, and it's a very important concept.
Yeah. So the title of your book, which is How to Get Your Resisting Loved One into Treatment, I've come in contact with individuals, both military and non, who are very resistant to therapy. Maybe they went as a kid with their family because the family was dysfunctional, and they were marginalized in that discussion in that therapy office. And so then they're like, therapy's not good. Therapy's for the weak. Therapy's not for me. What do we say to somebody who is struggling and it's obvious that they need some external resources and help, but the word therapy to them is is a word that they don't want to hear.
Mm-hmm. And those are very valid. That story resonates very well, is because you will get people, whether or not they're be a teen, adult, or some spectrum in their adult years, that they had a bad experience. Oh, my parents were going through divorce, and the therapist made me talk about my emotions, or they had maybe some unfortunate experience. And just like with the BA therapy or anything else, is when we have a bad experience, we create this very, very global belief system. All therapy is bad, and all that. And they don't give it a try. And so what I'd like to tell a lot of listeners as well is therapy, at least for me, has evolved greatly. Initially you go into therapy because something is wrong, right? People don't go into therapy if things are great. And let me just go tell someone and share someone how great my life is. No, but it's usually when something is not going well. However, for me, therapy has evolved. It's not all about, let's talk about our childhood traumas. Let's talk about just the things that we've been through, who hurt us, who we've hurt, and all the loss. A lot of conversations I have with people are sometimes career related. Okay, looking at career decisions, or be better communicators if they're a manager at work, how to have healthy relationships, which have impact on other areas of their life, being successful, developing their business. And so I look at therapy now as coaching, right? And that's what the model that I use is, what does a coach do? As you as a basketball coach, is you can't make anyone per se do something. You can't make someone practice outside of that time period that you're there. What you could do as a coach is to develop them the best way they can by giving them options and objective feedback. Yeah. And so that's what I look at myself, is I put down that tug-of-war rope. I can't tell people what they can and cannot do. I want to give them a preview of what another life can look like by giving them options and skills. And I put down that battle. I get people to say, Dr. Brian, I think I can manage my beer because whiskey was my problem. I think I can manage my THC because, heroin was my gig. I think I can not take my medication for my bipolar because, I have all these skills in place. I said, hey, I'm not going to argue with you what you can and cannot do, because that lifestyle that you engage in is always going to be there waiting for you. That disease is waiting right outside the door when I refer to them as treatment. All I'm doing is give you an option of what or not it could look like. So on some level, it is a choice. But I tell them that family unit out there, with those people supporting you, aren't going to continue to support that lifestyle that you've been living. And that's where I come in, is to work with the family unit. And then one last thing, too, is what I want to tell those people who, for various reasons, don't seek therapy, because it is scary for a lot of people. It's getting a very vulnerable side of them. But what I tell people as well is harboring secrets, right? Harboring especially intensive secrets does more harm than good, because sometimes people think that just because I don't think about something, just because it's at the forefront, therefore it's not having an impact. But no. It takes effort to hold down secrets. And what happens is those secrets end up turning into resentments. And those resentments almost always, which is unresolved anger, point back at ourselves, no matter who did what to us. And so therapy is one part, is looking for one part is giving them a safe place to acknowledge those secrets and to work through them and validate them, because a lot of times we have these assumptions and we create these faulty belief systems. For example, if I talk in therapy, I'm going to be shamed, or I'm going to be seen as weak. And for those people out there who had therapy before, I validate you, because maybe your experience wasn't well. But give it another shot. It is a powerful resource to be heard and acknowledged in a safe place. And so, yeah. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of an analogy. My shoe size is anywhere between 9.5 and 10, and I can try on different brands of shoes, and they don't all feel like they fit my foot, or that they're comfortable to walk in. And I think shoes are a lot like a therapist, and we can say a coach, because I've gone to some therapists who I did not merge with, I did not fit with, I didn't feel a connection. And if I had stopped after that one therapist, I would still be in this pit of struggle. But instead I went to another one, and then I went to another one. And then I found one that was the perfect fit for what I needed. And there was this connection, and I trusted them. And therefore I could be vulnerable in front of them. And then the healing journey really began. So like a pair of shoes, not all will fit exactly the same, even if they're the right size. You've got to keep going until you find what fits for you personally, and that connection where you feel like it's a safe space, you trust them, and you're able to then start the healing piece.
And if I can say one thing too, Michael, with that, is you're absolutely correct. We call it working alliance, and we also call it counselor attractiveness. Of course, attractiveness is not something about someone's looks.
You've got great hair.
Yeah. You have great hair. I like you. But counselor attractiveness could be a match for us, a compatibility. It could for some cultures, it's their education. They don't care about anything else. Hey, you have that degree. I like you. Some people, it's gender. Right. For some people, it is their life experience or age. Right. You know, someone who's maybe seeking therapy for divorce, and they want someone who's been married, and so that is a fit. Also, it's important to look at is discomfort is not a reason to not engage. And you talk about the military, because a lot of what that is about what they're telling you is developing this higher threshold of discomfort, right? Is that, hey, you know, when things are stressful, you see, you know, someone who gets hurt or passes away, is you're developing this threshold of discomfort. And just with that is, I tell people, you know, discomfort is a good thing. It means that something important is happening. You know, of course, this is assuming that the therapist or is appropriate. The discomfort is not for some inappropriate reason, of course, right? Sure. As well, but discomfort, you know, just in basketball, you don't. If your team's going to be good, you just don't do the bare minimum. You don't scrimmage against people who you're better than. You are putting yourself in uncomfortable situations, because that's where the growth takes place. And so if something's uncomfortable in therapy, like I don't want to talk about something, or this person's really triggering me because that is something I've repressed for a long time, invite that as something good and not something negative. And I believe, at least culturally in the U.S., our threshold for discomfort has greatly diminished. And it's critically important, like I said, you know, in working out, right? What are the most important repetitions if you're trying to grow your muscles? Those 1 or 2 past failure, right? Is because that's where the deepest fibers of your muscles starts to slowly tear and grow. And I believe that's very true. And that we have to invite discomfort. If it's uncomfortable, don't discard it. It's your data system telling you something is not right, and to explore that. And so that's what I wanted to mention on that some level. You want to find someone who's compatible, who makes you feel safe and comfortable. But when you find that person, right, know that there's going to be discomfort in there, and that is dated information. But don't also go around saying, well, no one's comfortable, and then you go on this journey, this escapade, and never find someone, because it's a barrier, and because no, you're never going to find someone. It's like finding a romantic partner. Oh, that person's not good enough. That person's not good enough, because then you end up alone. So you have to be able to find that right balance. This idea of discomfort equals growth is it really resonates with me. I don't think that there's anything in life worth doing that doesn't require obstacles and challenges in order to get to that next level. And you related it well to fitness. I'm a huge proponent of fitness for recovery, nutrition, connection, all these other elements too. But you're right. It is uncomfortable, but it's not an uncomfortableness that should be shied away from. And I'll give an example of what happened yesterday. I was finally interviewed by somebody else on their podcast, where they wanted me to share my story. Now it's easier for me to have other people tell me theirs and tell me their war stories, and for me to tell mine caused a great deal of anxiety. And but I did it. I went through the process yesterday with a trusted friend, and then I interviewed somebody an hour or so later, and he was really anxious. And I said,
brother, I know where you're at right now because I was just there. But let me tell you, I did it. And I feel so much better. And I promise when you talk to me about your stuff and you share your journey, you're going to come out of this being like, heck yeah. Heck yeah. Mm-hmm. Right.
Good. Are you familiar of the physiology, the basic physiology that happens when we connect with someone like that, when we talk with someone like that? Are you familiar?
No, not in scientific ways, no.
So, well, intimacy, right? Intimacy is just a close bond, right? You can be intimate. We think of intimate, the first thing we think of is soap opera intimacy. No. Intimacy, you can have an intimacy with a child, a parent, a spouse, a student, in therapy with your therapist, a pet even. So intimate is just a close bond. And so whenever we have that, because a lot of people say like, well, God, I go into therapy and I feel much better. So why do I need a therapist? Why do I have to seek a therapist? Why can't I just talk to my husband, my wife, my parents? And because what happens is when you make that connection, and that connection can be through dialogue, it could be through hanging out with someone, and embrace, a hug, to the whole spectrum, is a certain hormone is released called oxytocin. And oxytocin is the hormone that gets released. It's the feel-good one. And so that is what gets released when you intimately connect with someone. And that's explains on some part the reason why you feel better, and of course other things like dopamine and serotonin, which are the neurochemicals for mood and pleasure. But oxytocin is that's after a while you give a hug to someone, and there's a great deal of oxytocin released. And by the way, speaking of hugs, you give a 15-second hug to someone, it dramatically has an impact on the way you feel physiologically and mentally. So next time you do that, that's why, those embraces and are can be critically important. So try that with anybody. Give like a 10 to 15-second hug, and it can have a dramatic increase in mood. And what's happening is, of course, there's a great deal of oxytocin being released. And so it's really fascinating, the physiology of what happens. And so to answer the question, when people say, why can't I just talk to my spouse if I just feel better that way? But of course, there comes a limit, because a spouse is also emotionally invested in you, and so your spouse may not look at you objectively like a therapist will. They were afraid to say things. Well, God, if I say this, then he or she's going to get really upset at me. And so that's what a therapist is, to be an objective lens. And they're going to say things, at least to me, the type of therapy I do is I can't be afraid to hurt your feelings, so to speak. It's not going to be all hurrah, because if I'm doing that, I am not making you better. Just like you as a basketball coach, if you're just saying, it's great for positive feedback and reinforcing the successes, but if we're not giving objective feedback for things they're doing wrong, they're going to develop these bad habits. And it's our job to be able to do that and to know that we're coming from a good place.
Yeah, awesome. Brian, as we get close to the end here, I'm looking at the clock. I hate the fact that it's coming so close, because I know we can continue this for a long time, and maybe we need to make a part 2. But
Sure.
One word I want your quick thoughts on is intervention.
Intervention. And so, to me, like any word, there's a spectrum. So intervention can mean a whole array of things. And so intervention that people most popular or aware of, at least when it comes to the substance arena, is let's sit someone in the middle of the room and with all the family members and express our sentiment and concern for them to get help, which can be very important. Right? Intervention is an intentional plan for some type of desired outcome. And that can be very helpful if the attributes or everything's lining up in a good way for that to be successful. What my book tends to do is an intervention on the family unit minus the struggling loved one. Because if you don't intervene and really work with that family on creating a unified vision, a concrete plan, and develop the coalition that I talk about, the coalition to really, really follow through and not sway from the mission, so to speak, then the plan will founder very, very quickly. For example, if you get someone to treatment and they're there for 60 days, 90 days, or whatever else, and that family unit hasn't evolved or changed, and they're still carrying out those same dynamics and belief systems, they're not working on themselves, when that person re-enters that family system, the chance of long-term success greatly diminishes. Yeah. Does that mean that person can't be successful? True, they may be, but in my work, those are outliers. Those are rare. That family system has to be and grow and change and accept responsibilities, because I say that this disease has fractured the best and closest of families, but the recovery process I've seen bring families closer together prior to the disease even is because they're healing themselves, they're being honest, they're being open to direction, they're dealing with their past traumas and issues. And so the recovery process, like I said, I've seen it happen. The most fractured, disjointed family units come back together, and families that were close are moving closer together. So that's where the intervention, what it means for me, is that directed, intentional plan for a better outcome.
That's great. And finally, the last question I have for you, Brian, is related to what you just said at the very end, which is, talk to me about the hope of recovery for people who are currently struggling.
Yeah. So for families and people out there struggling, that's the first must know that I write about, the very first, and that's the whole premise of my book. The tone is to have hope, because people can get better. Recovery does work as long as everyone's doing their part. It's just that the strategies have to change, right? There's that saying, as you know, insanity, just doing it over and over again and thinking things are going to be different. And you can still come from that place, a loving place, supportive place. And I've seen it happen before in the most dire of cases. I've had people who attempted suicide 48 hours before coming to treatment, people who were wandering the streets from a meth-induced psychosis, people who were in jail and prison, and they're able to heal, get better, in the family unit to reunite. It's just that critical period that I call 30 to 90 days, where a lot of healing needs to initially take place. That's critically important. That's where I talk about and write about, is how do we get them in that window of 30 to 90 days and keep them there, because a lot can happen in that window, and that's where most people struggle. They leave after 2 weeks, or screw this, getting sober and alcohol is worse than drinking alcohol, because they don't give their body time to heal and break those patterns. And so we definitely have hope. And there's one last concept too to give hope: neuroplasticity. If you or your listeners aren't aware, it's our brain's ability to heal no matter what we've been through: trauma, head injuries, drug addiction. That's why we're resilient beings. We wouldn't be here for hundreds of thousands of years if we weren't resilient. And so our brains can truly heal from PTSDs, from traumas, from drug use. Doesn't mean we're completely impervious, right? We can reach a max limit, but for a lot of people that have been through a lot, you can re-heal and recircuit your brain and create new memories. So that's another aspect of hope.
Yeah, I love that you finished off with neuroplasticity, because it's something that I've been working on with my TBI for about a year and a half now at Utah State Universities. And it's actually through a speech therapist, of all things, but they have strategies they've developed there in that program to work with people with TBIs to overcome. Anyway, Dr. Brian, you've been a wealth of knowledge, and I love that we've ended on hope, that you did it on your own. You talked right up to it, and yeah, you're right. The theme that runs through your book is that there's hope constantly, and that's the main message I wanted people to learn today. That there's trauma, there's trials, there's struggles, there's dysfunction in families, there are negative coping habits that we've all developed, but there is hope, and we ought not be afraid of therapy and having some hard experiences to get us to that next level. And Dr. Brian, thanks very much for being on today. I've got some ideas for another show with us again in the future, and I look forward to more interaction. So thanks very much for joining.
Thank you very much, and thank you. Can I say one last message to all the listeners out there?
Please.
For the first responder, military, and I've worked with an array of people out there, whether it be a doctor or a nurse, and all the first-line responders, is that it's really important what you do, and it's really important to take care of yourself, and a lot of people don't do that, right? You're so caught into taking care of other people that we don't rewind it back. And so there's many ways to take care of yourself. And if I may just share this as well, is athletics and finding who you find purpose and value. That's critically important, whether it be sports or martial arts. And one martial art that I can really speak of, because the reason I relate to it is because I teammates and compete with a lot of first responders. It's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And if any of you aren't aware, it's an art, a ground art, that submission martial art. And so I get a lot of people, males and females, first responders, police officers, returning vets. Some of my closest friends are from the military who I compete against. And one thing that they resoundingly say is the culture of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is something that closely resembles the type of culture, cohesiveness, and camaraderie that they experience in the military or the police force. And so if there's anything that you're looking for to add that purpose and camaraderie and to really heal physically and mentally, a martial art, is great. I just can speak to the value as an active training and active competitor in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and just to try it. And for me, it's been a life and game changer.
I love that you've put that message in. I love jiu-jitsu. I tore my meniscus doing it recently, and it's so I'm in recovery from that, but I'm getting stronger again, and so I hope that someday I can get back to it again, because it really does produce that same level of unity like I had in the military as well. So great. Thanks very much again, Dr. Brian. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you much. Talk to you soon.
All right.